Welcome back to the World Lens podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Evans, Senior Manager of Digital Marketing at WTCI. Today, I'm joined by WTCI member Troy Lamel Stovall, CEO of TEDCO. Welcome, Troy. How you doing?
Great. Thank you for having me. Appreciate your time.
We're really grateful for having you on. So, for our listeners who may not be familiar, can you explain what TEDCO's mission is and
Yeah,
how
yeah.
you're serving as Maryland's economic engine for technology companies?
Oh, well, appreciate that starting question. I like to describe TEDCO as three objective functions, if you will. I'm an old math major, and we're an economic development entity. We're an ecosystem builder, and then we're also a venture capital arm. And we've got different metrics to talk about each of those. And some of the ones that I like to talk about is, we at the heart of what we do is we help early stage tech and life science companies take those ideas regardless of where those ideas start. If they start in a lab, if they start whether it's a federal lab or a university's lab, if they start in somebody's garage, if they start in somebody's back of the napkin, it doesn't matter where they start. We want to bring them along, get them to the point, give them the capital that they need, give them the resources that they need, whether that resource is a lawyer, a office space, computing, whatever they need to accelerate their growth to that next phase, the next stage of capital that they need to get to the end. When you look at the almost 30 years that we've been around, we've had
Mhm.
over $3 billion of impact. We actually are working on some numbers on the value of our portfolio, which think is worth about $6 billion of unrealized
Wow.
value in our portfolio, 10,000 jobs, and we continue to do great things to make sure that companies. We just had a expo brought together over 1,000 people. It's the largest gathering of the eco innovation ecosystem here in
Very
Maryland
cool.
on the East Coast. Um, we just announced a $50 million joint investment with our friends in Taiwan. We've
Hmm.
got some investments that we're going to be doing with South Koreans, work that we're also going to be doing with Jordan. So those aren't about, sometimes people think that's about taking jobs away from there. No, this is about accelerating the growth trajectory for those companies, opening up new markets for our companies that but for wouldn't be able to get to an Asian market or Middle Eastern market or even a
Hmm.
European market. We're making sure we give our founders all the tools that they need for their success.
That's awesome. So you've had quite an impressive journey yourself. Started AT&T Bell Labs to McKinsey, some HBCUs, and now you're at TEDCO. What drew you to economic development and entrepreneurship, like support?
Yeah, I grew up in Houston, Texas.
Hmm.
Went to Catholic schools from pre-kindergarten to 12th grade, and I partially joke, partially true. Partially true. I want to be a priest. I actually did want to be a priest growing up.
Oh.
Um, and the joke is I went to seminary, and I did kind of go to seminary. I'd stay for like 5 minutes, maybe, maybe 5 minutes. And so there is this a sense of service that has
Hmm.
been built into me, and it really comes from my mom, who's gone on to glory. And mom told my sister and I, who's also gone on to glory, she told my sister and I that you're in this world for one reason and one reason only, and that one reason is to make a difference in one person's life. The challenge is you do not know who that one person is or when they're going to come into your life. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, you have to make a difference in everyone's life. And the way, Michelle, that I say it a little differently now, again, staying biblical, is I know that my cup overflows.
Hmm.
So the point of a cup overflowing can do one of two things. It can fall to the floor or it can fall into somebody else's cup.
Hmm.
My job is to maximize my overflow into somebody else's cup.
That's awesome. So you took on your role at TEDCO in 2020. I actually remember when
Mhm.
you took on. I was at MindGrub at the time.
Yeah.
There was a
Our-
pandemic
My,
happening,
my friend
economic,
Todd.
yes. During the pandemic, economic uncertainty, like there is like a reckoning on racial equity at that point. How did
Yep, yep.
those circumstances specifically shape your approach to this economic empowerment versus like a traditional economic development?
Yeah. So, again, because I joke probably too much.
It's fine.
I I didn't meet my board chair, the woman who hired me, for I was here about a year and a half before I got to see her face to face. I mean,
Oh,
we went,
wow.
Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's a lot of we could spend a whole podcast just on that because I think the each generation has those pivot points in their history.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm old enough um to remember, I think 9/11 was a pivot point in our
Mm-hmm.
history, and now COVID. And I still believe, 5 years later, well, less than 5 years later, we're still feeling the impact of COVID.
Yeah.
Impact in terms of how we think about the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
how we think about the definite. I think there's I call it a civil war happening in the workplace of my generation. A little bit, those of us that a little bit have been here for a minute, those who are coming into it.
Mm-hmm.
But the definition of work is, and what that means. And I think some of that is a good conversation to have. But I also do believe that we've done a disservice to that younger generation, because when I was coming up, being in the office every day, you got to see how people dressed and how
Yeah.
they carried themselves and how they talked and those manners, and you just can't get that over Zoom.
Right.
I think the other thing, and it's more direct to your question, I do believe that we as a country, as a world, have we lost that spontaneous innovation. We still are losing it. So you have a great idea, you walk down the hallway, I'm here in the office, and we get on the whiteboard and we just, we
Mm-hmm.
do our thing. Now I got to wait 2 to 3 weeks to get on your Zoom calendar, and the
Right.
spontaneity is gone.
Yeah.
And I do believe that innovation we're going to see, and I think we're seeing it. If there's someone to measure kind of the velocity of innovation that we had in this
Mm-hmm.
country and the planet, I think we've taken a hit because you did not, because we still don't have. I'm sitting here in the office, and it's maybe 10% of the folks that are here, and
Yeah.
so we to answer your question, I think we've got to rethink how we come together as individuals, how we manage those
Mm-hmm.
things. I think then lastly, I think, and I'm an advocate of this, we got to rethink the metrics of what's the definition of success. And traditional economic development is always about jobs. How do
Right.
we create jobs? Well, look, here's the deal. The average TEDCO portfolio company is 2.5 to 3 people. So and as an investor, it actually is antithesis. We actually want you to grow. We don't want you to grow employees. I mean, that's because we want you to grow capital efficiently. And
Right.
so as an investor, so that's back to that, I'm in economic development and venture capital. Those things work against one another because economic development wants you to grow a bunch of jobs. As an
Right.
investor, I want you to grow
Capital.
revenues.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to grow net income, right? Which
Right.
means not having a lot of people. So I think a better metric, or another metric, maybe is the best way to say it, is things around is capital flowing into the state that but for wouldn't have come here? Are we retaining talent that we but for would have left the state? Are we importing talent that but for would not have come to? I think we've got to start to rethink the metrics of economic development that have been around since the 1950s,
Right.
and refocus it, and the definition of work. All these things are I'll close on this one piece on your questions, probably longer than you wanted, but if you think about it, prior to COVID, um, the we all went to whether it was called an office or a church or a
Mm-hmm.
synagogue or a concert hall or stadium. All of us went into the smallest amount to put. We tried to put as many people in the smallest amount of space as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That was the basic
That's
model.
what it was. Yeah.
We get to COVID, we ain't trying to put a whole lot of people in a space.
Right.
But think about our definition of work, our definition of economic development is about Michelle woke up this morning, you drove to somewhere you understand union, but you drove to the office. That was the old definition. You drive to the office, drop the
Mm-hmm.
kids off at school, you go to work, you reverse that in the evening, you take them to soccer, whatever. We took them our kids to swim practice, and then
Mm-hmm.
you went home. And all of our metrics were built around that fundamental
Yeah.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
That thing is not broken.
Yeah. It's not the
But
same.
our metrics are still trying to measure us off of behavior that we are no longer many of us are no longer doing.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point. Things have changed so much, post COVID, but it seems like you have adapted pretty well. You just mentioned how you guys recently signed agreements with like Korea and Jordan, Taiwan. Which driving this international expansion strategy? How do these partnerships actually benefit entrepreneurs in Maryland?
Yeah. Well, it starts with the governor. So the governor, he's been clear, um, that the state can no longer just be dependent on the federal government.
Hmm.
Maryland is extremely dependent on the federal government, and we're seeing the results of our dependency on the federal government. And the state itself has its own budgetary challenges, but he
Nice.
has made it clear that we've got to grow in certain sectors, and we're going to
Mhm.
do that. And so, to get the resources that we believe we need at TEDCO to do that, we have what we call these pillars. There are four pillars. The first pillar is the state.
Mhm.
And what we want to do with the state is continue to be supported, to get support from the state. And we can increase that, we increase it, but we want to at least maintain, what we're currently getting.
Mhm.
The second pillar is the federal. We've been extremely successful in these last 2.5 years going after federal grants and earmarks. I joke that if we were a baseball player, we'd be in the Hall of Fame twice with the batting average. We've been able to secure
Mhm.
this. So we've had some great leadership there.
Nice.
Um, the third one is philanthropic. We're just beginning to we've got some small grants that, but we're starting to really rev up there.
Mhm.
And the last one is the venture community. And so, how do we begin to tap into the venture community? And so that led us to the creation of what we're calling the Opportunity Fund, because TECO, we kind of tap out at writing about a $2.5 million check, and but we can put more than that in the company because we can aggregate it from other funds that we have. But two is the
Mhm.
biggest one single check that we can write. And
Okay.
so when we get our companies in what's called like the B or C round of financing, of maturation, we can't participate because they're looking for a 5 to 7, $10 million check.
Right.
So we have launched the Opportunity Fund to go after traditional limited, what's called limited partners or investors, to be in a pool of capital like a traditional venture fund, but with some changes to it. That led to a number of conversations. The governor had already gone to South Korea and Japan through some relationships of my own and through our friends at the Department of Commerce. We
Mhm.
were introduced to folks from Taiwan, from South Korea. So we have this, we literally had the South Korean Sovereign Wealth Fund in our office just yesterday.
Mm.
Looks like I'm going to have to make another trip to Korea to do a final presentation to them in early December. Um, Last year, the governor had the King of Jordan and his delegation here.
Yep, I
Governor
remember
asked me
that.
to be a part of that, and so through those conversations, we are going to be helping our friends in Jordan think about how to build out their ecosystem. And so we'll be making some trips to Jordan sometime in 2026. So the question, the fundamental is why we're doing this. A, to get access to more resources to help accelerate the growth. I talk a lot about the job at TEDCO is to touch these entrepreneurs, touch them in a way such that we can accelerate their growth. And we
Mhm.
want to accelerate their growth because why? And I talked about capital coming into the state. If we can just get 5%, just 5% of our portfolio companies that are growing faster than the national average, or getting valuation accretion faster than the national average, just 5%,
Mhm.
the outside investors will say, "What the heck is going on in Maryland? We want to
Mhm.
know," and bring that
We
capital to
want that.
Maryland. Eh,
Mhm.
We want to be a part of that. And that capital will come not just to that 5%, because they'll think it's more than just the 5%. They'll think it's going on to with everybody. So the
Mhm.
accretion will happen. So to answer your questions, we're bringing these these are all accelerants. These are all fuels to the fire. We're bringing the resources so that we can accelerate that growth trajectory for our entrepreneurs. That's the answer to the question.
Nice. From a global trade perspective, how do you help your startups think beyond, these domestic markets? How do you put that in their head that, like, yes, Maryland is great, but you also need to have a bigger picture?
No question. So a number of them. So again, at Expo that we had back in October,
Mm-hmm.
we actually had a panel with our friends from Taiwan and South Korea, and afterwards there was a line of companies looking to bring their products, and so we're trying to identify those what we think would be those products, those entities that would have an easy cross, cultural,
Mm-hmm.
trajectory, and also look for manufacturing opportunity where they can actually manufacture there locally as well. And so we think some of that's going to probably be in the med tech space.
Mm-hmm.
Partly is that the FDA approval kind of is a golden ticket into some of these other countries, particularly Taiwan and South Korea, in terms of their regulatory approval. So we think we can be able to translate around those quicker than some of the other things
Mm-hmm.
like software, which you'd have to in some case software have to be rewritten for the language and those type of things. But a medical device should have some applicability moving into Asia via Taiwan and South Korea. The other thing we're doing is we already have one of our companies already doing this. So it's called N5 sensors. N5 has these sensors that allow you to detect smoke, fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't know this till I went over there, but most of South Korea is forest and mountains. It's a
Nice.
very urbanized country, and so
Mm-hmm.
they have a huge challenge of trying to make sure forest fires get detected
Mm-hmm.
earlier. And so N5 developed a partnership with a local firm over there, and that local firm got them introduced to the key players that they needed to get access to the forestry mission. So when I went to go visit, I guess back in September, we developed relationships with a number of these companies that could act as, for lack of a better word, landing spots. So when we'll say, hey, here are 5 companies. You pick
Mm-hmm.
one of the ones you want to, 'cause we can't tell you who to go to, but here's 5 companies that
Mm-hmm.
can help you get introduced to the South Korean market.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah, the CEO of N5 is actually speaking on one of our panels for State of the
There you go.
Ports.
There you go.
um, so you also
There are no accidents. There are no
none.
accidents.
Everything is it happens for a reason. You mentioned that like state borders should not constrain any access to programs, when you were discussing your regional bridge program. Can you tell me a little more about that program and how like this mindset of regional and global shapes TEDCO's work?
Yeah. Again, I think, look, entrepreneurs don't see borders.
Mhm.
They see opportunities, right? And I talk about this notion of what I call the circle problem. The circle problem is, particularly with politicians, the circles are things called cities and counties and states. And the challenge is, you know, that's how they operate in those circles,
Mhm.
right? They see themselves in those districts or those states, and I
Right.
get it, and I respect it. But again, back to COVID, and it used to be that what happened what that got produced in a circle impacted that circle. But now, because of COVID, something can happen in circle A and impact circle B and impact
Mhm.
circle C, because we don't have to be in a place anymore. And so back to our metrics still assuming back to my earlier point that you woke up in the morning, you
Mhm.
drove from place, dropped the kids off, and you reversed that. Within there was a circle,
Mhm.
and and COVID has said, no, you don't have to be in that circle. I can be here in Maryland and have an impact in South Korea, or have an impact in Taiwan, or
Mhm.
impact in Western Europe. And so I think the metrics have to be shifted to get that. But I
Mhm.
think entrepreneurs don't see the borders because they're just looking for opportunity.
Right.
And sometimes opportunities are in Maryland, and we actually do want to grow these things in Maryland. So I think what we talk about is this doesn't take away from growth in Maryland. It helps accelerate the growth of these companies so that they can grow and to be these regional and global players that they got to have.
Mhm. You you mentioned earlier that you guys have like created almost what $3 billion in impact,
Hmm.
but you've been pretty intentional about making sure that it's inclusive impact.
Yep,
Can you discuss your social impact funds and like exactly why you're addressing these
yep.
economic disadvantages as a key point of your strategy?
Yeah, so great question. And so, one of the things I talk about, one of the things I'm very proud of it, one is Pitch Book, which is this, big national publication, has named
Hmm.
us one of the top venture capital in terms of volume on the East Coast and in the country. And
Awesome.
then just last year, NASDAQ had us under a marquee in Times Square. We were recognized as a leader in looking at investing in we use the term underinvested markets.
Mm.
And I'm very proud of the fact that, when across the United States, across the planet, less than 1% of venture capital is going to people of color, women in rural areas.
Hmm.
50% of our investments are going to people of color, women, and rural investments,
That's amazing.
rural founders. And that's both dollars and deal volume. And so you can do well and do good. You can continue to
Hmm.
find the best of the best, and the best of the best can be wherever they are. And so we want to make sure that all of Maryland is represented in our results. And we're intentional about that. We have resources across the state. We have resources in our rural areas, in Baltimore City, in Prince George's County. We're actually putting people now in some of the other counties as well through some efforts that we through a $10 million grant that we got from the federal government.
Mm.
And so we talk about this notion. I taught you about want to be a priest, but I ended up growing up. I was a black Catholic in Texas, which is an anomaly in and of itself.
Same, just not in Texas.
Yeah, black Catholic in the South is an anomaly. So I grew up
Yeah.
around a bunch of Baptist ministers, and they talk in alliterations, and so do I
Hmm.
now. because it helps me remember stuff, and that's why they do it. And so I talk about the four S's, and this is the
Mm-hmm.
answer to your question. I think we have to be intentional about scaling and stitching. I think we would, I talk about Maryland. When I grew up in Texas, if you want to drive across the state of Texas, you needed a couple of lunches and a sleeping bag.
Yeah.
If you're going to drive across the state of Maryland, I just need a couple of Diet Cokes, and I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
And the state is 6 million people, give or take. That's basically the size of the metropolitan area of Houston, where I grew up. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not that big, size or numerically, but we do have a lot of great assets, as the governor likes to say. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not stitched together. They're not working in a collaborative way. And the first rule of leadership, Michelle, is followership. We got to learn to sometimes follow. We got five people working on the same problem. No, we need one group working on that problem, and the other four of us are following that one.
Mm-hmm.
That's stitching. And that also creates scale because we got to start putting some zeros. We can't, other places are doing, well, we're doing $5 million. Some people are doing $500 million on that same
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so when you scale, you stitch, and when you stitch, you scale. And that leads to the third S, which is what you're doing with this podcast, is storytelling. We got to do a better job of storytelling with data that's
Mm-hmm.
saying this is really what it's about. And if you do a good job of storytelling, guess what you do? You get access to more resources that allow you
Yeah.
to scale and stitch better. That creates a cycle. I can scale and stitch better. I can storytell better. I get access to more resources. I scale and stitch. But I told you there were four S's. So there's
Mm-hmm.
scaling, the stitching, the storytelling, because the whole point of all that scaling, stitching, and storytelling is to create a high level of stickiness for companies that start in Maryland to stay in Maryland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely need
That's the whole
that.
point of all this. That's the whole point of this.
So I know that you guys have this like innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem within like all these higher education institutions. Why was it important to focus on Baltimore's academic institutions?
Well, so yeah, so BI, you talked about the BII. So
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of a story there. So we already have an effort called the Maryland Innovation Institute. That's considered one of the best in the country. It focuses on the five research institutions, that being Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, College Park, University of Maryland, Baltimore, Baltimore County, and then Morgan State.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a great job of taking those ideas that are in the labs I mentioned earlier, and commercial can get into a commercialization. Considered one of the best in the country at it. But we recognized several years ago that all great ideas don't just emanate from those five institutions, they're from the smaller institutions as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did a pilot with Bowie State and with Frostburg that was very successful to figure out, because they're just different institutions, so you can't try to force them to look like Johns
Us.
Hopkins or College
Mm-hmm.
Park. So what do we have to do differently to make that thing happen? And so because of that, and because of the Tech Hub effort that it had been launched, a couple of years ago under the Biden administration, um, Baltimore was applying for the Tech Hub, and we got it. We got
Yeah, I
designated a Tech Hub
remember.
a couple of years
Mm-hmm.
ago, and TechCo was very involved with that. So as part of that support, we just worked with the governor to create the Baltimore Innovation Initiative as a kind of a follow-on pilot that looked at how do we start looking at this not just for the research institutes like Hopkins and University of
Mm-hmm.
Maryland, Baltimore, but for the community colleges, for the Coppin states, for the Towsonds. And so the plan, and so that's actually, we're doing that. But on top of that, there was a bill passed last year that extended the MII concept to every institution in the state. It's just
Okay,
not funded. BI's funding, actually, its funding is going to play out next year, or this year, yeah, this year. But we're looking to take that whole concept of MII to the entire state.
that's awesome. You mentioned how Maryland is small, but we still want to kind of grow, and we're competing with these other tech hubs like Boston and Austin. Um, what's the what's Maryland's value proposition for entrepreneurs, and why should they build here?
Well, I'm gonna borrow from my fraternity brother, double fraternity brother, the governor. We do have some amazing assets. We have more folks that have education, bachelor's degrees and PhDs than anywhere else in the country. We've got more federal labs than any
Hmm.
place in the country. Because of Hopkins and College Park, we've got more federal research dollars per capita than I think we're top five state in the country with that. What we haven't done, so we do have some basically some great soil, for lack of a better
Hmm.
way to say it, um, because of I talk about I'm old enough to remember, uh, Popeye the Sailor Man. Some of y'all folks ain't
Hmm.
gonna know what the heck I'm talking about. Popeye was a
With the
cartoon
pipe
character.
and the
Yeah, Popeye the
spinach.
Sailor Man. It's
Hmm.
actually spinach was his thing that became his strength.
Hmm.
And everybody knows Superman, but Superman was great, but a little bit of kryptonite could cripple him, right?
Hmm.
So I argue, the same thing can be both spinach and kryptonite. And for us, we're seeing that in Maryland through the federal. Depends on our federal dependency and all these federal labs have been
Yeah.
a great part of our spinach. And because when the rest of the country was going through a recession or depression, we were pretty stable because the federal government was doing all that.
Hmm.
But we're now discovering that our spinach is also
That
our
kryptonite.
kryptonite.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I saw something a few months ago, I think, that said Maryland was like one of the best places for recent college grads to come.
Yep, exactly.
So we're doing something right. Uh, you've mentioned earlier that you've overseen initiatives from stem cell research funding, the cybersecurity, to the Baltimore Tech Hub. What emerging sectors are you most excited about for Maryland's future? And what does that look like for Maryland's innovation ecosystem in the next 10 to 20
Yeah.
years?
Yeah, so the governor, has launched the lighthouse sectors where we focus on
Mm-hmm.
things like quantum, things like positional navigational systems, like computational biology, and I think all those are right. I think those are right things. AI is, AI is a
Mm-hmm.
tool. I think sometimes the media overstates what AI. AI is a tool
Yeah.
that's been around since the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've written, data analytical tools, over the course of my career. So these things have been around. I think what's changed here in the last few years is ChatGPT brought
Access.
it to the masses. Yeah, it brought access. It brought access. It's no different when the personal computer showed up on everybody's desk. We thought, oh my God, the world's about to end because I can do
Mm-hmm.
all this computing stuff. And then when the internet showed up, it was like, oh my God, this is
Right.
So I'm not saying AI is not going to have an impact. It absolutely, just like the internet did, just like personal computers did, it absolutely will. But I think we sometimes we overextend what it is, and so
Mm-hmm.
and what it can and cannot do. Um, as I think I saw a Wall Street Journal article, some publication that only 5% of these AI investments are going to actually have a return on investment, which I think is true.
Hmm.
I think it's true. Only 5%
Interesting.
will, yeah, I think. But that's no different. We saw the same thing again in the early computing world. We saw the same thing with the internet. This is a traditional thing. And if you go all the way back when the steam locomotive came on, people were like, "Oh
Yeah.
my God, what's going to happen to the blacksmith?" When the
Losing their
locomotive.
minds. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody lost their mind. Oh, when the car came out, everybody's like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen
Mm-hmm.
to all this the buggy, horse and buggy?" And so we've had these technological change, and the workforce has had to shift
Mm-hmm.
because of these technologies. And so we're seeing that shift. And yes, are the shifts happening faster than they have in the past? No question about that. And so I think we've got to do a rethought or rethinking, maybe is a better word, of how we get people prepared. And so how we think about preparation.
Mm-hmm.
4-year college degrees may not be the right path for everybody, given these rapid changes that we're
Yeah.
doing. And how do you think about credentialing and more stacking of skills over time? I think has to be rethought, and how we think about training has to be rethought. We have to rethink job descriptions and what an entry level job really is, and what then
Yeah.
progressive is that. And so those are all the things that are really happening, to answer your question. And so to your point, I think all the sectors are right. But I also think there's opportunity, and what I talk about is that the intersection of things. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the intersections I talk a lot about is a cyber ag. Think about, you got up this morning, ate your breakfast, ate your cereal, ate your whatever you ate. You ever think about where's your food come from? Where's that water you came from? You don't think about it,
Yeah.
right? But what it takes to move something from a farm to production to your table, to the grocery store, to your table, there's a ton of value chains, and there's a ton of ways in which it's not that whole system isn't protected because it's not integrated.
Right.
And so if you start thinking about that, I think for one, I think it's a national security thing. I think there literally should be a Secretary of Cybersecurity, Cyber Ag. I believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Because the because there's all kinds of ways for someone to do something nefarious along the way.
Yeah.
Uh, and so how you integrate that, and it takes all the things that we're really good at here in Maryland. We cyber, agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
quantum, AI, bio life sciences, all those things at the intersection of cyber ag.
Hmm. So, what advice would you give to international entrepreneurs or companies considering Maryland as a base for their U.S. operations or expansion?
Yeah, I mean, look, the governors and the team at Commerce, my friends at Commerce, Secretary Coker and his friends at Commerce, are doing some good stuff to make this, a place that you can land, a place where you can feel welcome. People talk about the fact that Maryland is America. Kind of there's all kinds of all parts of America are represented. Everything from the physical mountains and beaches and rivers
Hmm.
and plains, all the way to the diversity that's here. We got an extremely diverse population that's here,
Yeah.
um, and so you can find your community here. And you can find your hood here, if you would. And so I think that's what makes Maryland. Even with those 6 million people, even though we're small, and we sit here, I can get to Philadelphia in an hour and a half. I can get to DC, depending on traffic, in an hour. Just yesterday I was down in Raleigh, North Carolina. I can get to Raleigh, North Carolina. I can get to
Hmm.
Boston in a couple hours. And so you can, I think I saw this stat that the port of Baltimore is the westernmost East Coast port. And and you have to get your mind
Yeah.
in with the
It's like,
westernmost East port. Yeah, but it makes sense, and the reason that's important is because it's a transportation point. Because if you can get in further, more west, which is where Baltimore is, compared to a Charlotte or New York or
hmm.
Philly, if you're a little bit more far, then you've taken off some miles to get to those
Right.
markets that are more west.
So, just to wrap up, if listeners want to learn more about TEDCO and their programs or connect with you, what's the best way to engage?
Our wonderful website, which is being redone, but it's still a great Tammy Thomas and her team who leads what we call our development and marketing team. There, we should going to re-engineer the website here, but it's still a great source of information. People can apply to any of our programs. You don't have to apply. We're actually launching a thing called My TEDCO. Actually, just saw the screenshots for it. So that we want to move to a model, Michelle, where you don't have to figure out which program or which service. We actually prefer to call them services that you or fund.
Hmm.
You come to the house of TEDCO, you apply, we learn about you, and then we assign you a digital concierge, a virtual concierge, and they, based on where you are and what you need, they walk you to the rooms that you need.
That's
And
awesome.
then you leave that and we stay in communication with you. And as we learn more about you and we see your growth trajectory, we want to go back to Michelle. Say, hey, Michelle, in 6 months, 8 months, you're going to need these other rooms. Here's some other rooms that you're going to need. So we want to get predictive. So we initially going to be reactive, but the goal is to get predictive. The real goal is to get to a point, is to say, hey, if you come to us and you look like this, back to my touches, we want to be able to say, here is your journey, Michelle. If you follow these 7 or 8 touches, you have a 95% chance of success.
Hmm. That's awesome.
That's what we want to get to. That's our AI. That's the AI tool we're building.
That's awesome. TEDCO is making moves in the right direction.
Well, I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, Troy, for joining me today and answering all of my questions. And thank you all for tuning in to another episode of The World Lens. To learn more about our events, insights, and member news, visit WTCI.org. And you can also connect with us on all our social channels at WTC Institute. Until next time.